Les malades avaient peur de l'hôpital.
Sick people were scared of the hospital.
Les soignants,
Caregivers were afraid of patients
parce que pour eux,
because the smallest oversight could cause a patient to contaminate you.
ils vous contaminent.
Infectious disease is very complicated. Disease mutate, they change. Every virus have their own little unique feature. Healthcare workers should never remove their risk assessment mindset. You go to a situation, you need to know the basic principles.
A caregiver with AIDS, for instance, if he's a surgeon or a dentist, could transmit AIDS just by pricking himself by accident. So this goes to show that a caregiver can just as well be the victim and the origin of the infection of the patient.
Every epidemic we have seen in the past 15 years, be it with the SRAS and even today with the Ebola virus, are telling us that despite all our precautionary measures, infectious diseases are still very present. And in hospitals, you have the issue of bacterial infections that still occupy very regularly, or iatrogenic infections, which are a major issue. So yes, I'd say from this point of view, we really experienced a regression. It's very important to have sophisticated measures that are put in place, but you need to combine them with simple prevention methods that are still essential.
Each day, an estimated 500,000 people worldwide contract an infection while receiving medical treatment. 16 million die from these infections every year. That's more than the deaths from AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis combined. Ebola, as well as SARS and influenza, lead to major and severe health crises. Hospitals are still the place where people are cared for. However, they also kill on a daily basis.
The top of the burden of disease, we have diseases like cancer, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity. But infection in healthcare settings is quite high up on that list. It's not quite as high as those other diseases, but it's certainly near the top of the league table, and therefore it deserves to have a higher priority than it's had in the past.
In Europe today, an estimated 80,000 patients are being infected by care-related infections each day. In developing countries, the rate of these infections is 2 to 20 times as high. And we know that more or less 15% of the patients being hospitalized catch an infection related to treatment.
These innocent victims, ignored by medical history, became the concern of one man, his obsession even. Didier Petit is neither a hero nor an ordinary doctor. A graduate in infectious diseases and epidemiology, he is the world expert of healthcare-associated infection prevention.
Eat now? You like to eat? Yes. It is very... Healthcare-associated infections are infections that were not supposed to happen once you come to the hospital. In other words, you come to the hospital for one reason, and you get an infection while you are in the hospital, which is totally unfair. Now, sometimes the infection is very minor. You may have to change a little bit the treatment. Sometimes you stay for some extra days in the hospitals. Sometimes you stay for much longer. And unfortunately, some patients may die of healthcare-associated infections. Well, bacteria and viruses can survive on your hands. They can also survive in the environment. When we say that viruses can survive on your hands, we think about hours or sometimes a little more. In the environment, they can survive according to temperature or humidity. Bacteria can survive on hands, and of course in the environment. They can survive for days, for weeks, and even more. The problem is that bacteria can constitute even reservoirs in the environment. Once you get that on your hands, you can of course cross-transmit those bacteria or viruses to other people.
No one is really interested in healthcare-associated infections. Physicians would rather work on cancer research or genetics. Yet one doctor opened the path in the 19th century, Semmelweis, a young obstetrician who cared for his patients and was appalled to see them dying in large numbers in his maternity ward, without any reason, or so it seemed. The author Louis-Ferdinand Céline wrote a medical thesis about him in 1924. Semmelweis, his life and work. Yet Semmelweis, the father of hospital hygiene, was ridiculed by his peers and ended up in a mental hospital, his work misunderstood and ignored. In Paris, another scientist, both a chemist and a physicist, was also studying the problem of infections. Louis Pasteur, Semmelweis's contemporary, is best known for discovering the rabies vaccine, but was interested in all infectious diseases. They fascinated him. Before others, he realized that a single contact might be sufficient to transmit disease. A visionary, he foresaw that hygiene would play an important role in modern societies.
He introduced the concept of hygiene with an English surgeon who had really listened to what Pasteur had to say. At a time when no one listened to Pasteur. He was the first one to apply the principles of sanitation and to be careful, just like Semmelweis in Hungary. So there was a small group of precursors of which Pasteur was a member. The myth around Pasteur says that he avoided as much as possible to shake hands with people he'd meet. I'm not saying this is what we ought to do, but this goes to show how conscious he was of the risks of bacteria transmission between two people. He really invented hygiene.
Doctors' hands, nurses' hands placed on a patient. Healing, comforting, caring hands, but hands that can contaminate too. In 1992, Didier Petit obtained his master's degree in epidemiology and public health at the University of Iowa in the United States and returned to Geneva, his hometown. There, he led an ambitious infection prevention program at the University of Geneva hospitals. Didier Petit then took up an enormous challenge, a thorough and detailed investigation of the infection problem.
My first mission when we set up the infection control program in the university hospital was to recognize if there were infections and what were the reasons for those infections. So what we did is large studies where we went into every wards in the hospital and counted infections. We also looked for the reasons for those infections, and of course, very rapidly realized that hand hygiene was the problem. When we got interested in looking at the practices for hand hygiene, we needed some clear definitions. There were some information in the literature, but that was not very clear. So we needed to look at what are the opportunities for healthcare workers to clean their hands during patient care. So we worked a lot on redefining, if you like, the indications. And once we got those indications, the when should you clean your hands, then we could really look at the practices very carefully.
When I came to Geneva 20 years ago, hospital hygiene was like the field for the least creative researchers. It was like the field where nobody would go. The doctors thought, oh, this is just for nurses. Doctors are performing noble tasks. hospital hygiene is not for them. So Didier really had the visions also to say, no, you know, there are some very important preventive tasks that have to be fulfilled every day when you take care of patients, to protect your patients. And he really started to also change the mindset of a lot of people in Geneva, in Switzerland, in Europe, and across the globe.
This small flask, preciously kept at the pharmacy of the University of Geneva Hospitals, contains one of the first alcohol-based hand rub formulations made on site and available to healthcare staff. William Griffiths, a chemist from that hospital, developed the very first formula of the alcohol-based solution, initially created in Germany and long known for its antiseptic efficacy. These bottles inspired Didier Petit and the infection control team.
At the time when I developed my formula, a product created by a big pharmaceutical company already did exist. But it was quite different. There was an antiseptic, but the alcohol was different. It was less efficient when we compared the test results with those of my formula. The antiseptic was quite poor. If I hadn't developed my formula in Geneva at the time, we'd be using that product today, and we wouldn't have gotten that far. But we continued to use that product for many, many years, until 1994. It was then the professor asked me, "Can we use yours?" for a study he had in mind.
During my fellowship in infectious disease, we worked in the laboratory, in the microbiological laboratory, to learn how to recognize bacteria. And at that time, we used to have a little flask of alcohol right next to us, so that in case we contaminate our hands with a multi-resistant bacteria, we just could clean our hands before going to the sink to wash our hands with soap and water. It was not so eccentric, if you like, to imagine to use alcohol in the clinics at the point of patient care. The revolution in this case was to imagine to use it systematically.
It really was a revolution because this alcohol-based product was in the hospital, but we didn't know what to do with it. We used it at first when we were making the beds. When I came to Geneva, I was told, use it when you make the beds. And that was it. And all at once, we had to promote its use. And we had a lot of help from the staff, a lot of ideas. The flat bottle, the pocket bottle, placing it by the patient's bed. So as a team, we made a lot of progress. But at the end of the day, I think it was so convenient and met such a clear need. It was rather tedious to disinfect, to go and wash your hands. I can't even remember it anymore. So actually, we didn't do it all that well.
Washing your hands at the sink just took too much time. Time to leave your patient, go to the sink, turn on the water, apply the soap for 30 to 45 seconds, rinse your hands, and then dry your hands and go back to your patient. We needed to find a solution. We needed to change behavioral practices by healthcare workers. So we thought about replacing soap and water hand washing by alcohol-based hand rubbing. Now, the issue was that the alcohol that we had at that time was not the alcohol that we are using today. It was not as good. It was not as efficient. It was not as well tolerated. But obviously, we decided to use the alcohol. It was somewhere chance and common sense to decide to use alcohol.
The modest infection prevention department sought to impose the use of these small flasks of alcohol instead of soap and water. That raised interest, curiosity, and some opposition, but also questions and doubt about existing practices.
The reactions at the beginning were quite different. Some people were amused, and others were puzzled. People were telling, where is he going with this story? And you know, the research that we were doing was considered, I don't like to use those terms, but was considered as nursing research. In other words, that was not research. Other colleagues, those who understood, were actually puzzled. And they say, They came to me and they say, Didier, it's impossible. We cannot imagine to wash our hands 5, 6, or even 10 times an hour. And I say, well, it seems that you should. And today, this is what we do.
I did my nurse training over 30 years ago, and all the nurses in my generation have been taught to wash their hands at the sink. It's hard to tell people my age what you have learned you can forget 90% of. And what's more, from now on you'll have to use the hand sanitizer. That change is so huge, it's very difficult to teach.
The main obstacle, as always, is people resisting change. That's human nature. No one wants to change their practices and behaviors because they're comfortable habits, especially when you don't fully understand how crucial the change can be.
It's fantastic to have, for infection control, what is difficult sometimes is to get the endorsement of the people in the world. Like, I know some of my colleagues in some hospitals around the world, they could not even enter the ICU. They are not welcome.
A lot of healthcare professionals are resistant to change. They have their own habits and procedures, their own way of doing things, and they're sometimes very slow to do something new, even if that something new is going to save lives. And you do have to work very, very hard. We talk about it as cultural change. And some people have said that the definition of culture is the way we do things around here. And I would add to that, the way we do things around here when no one's looking.
Stubbornly determined to combat the inertia of long-ingrained habits, Didier Petit and his team did not give up. They knew they were moving in the right direction.
We all know about the fact that, you receive every day tons of materials, you even receive guidelines, you don't read them. Healthcare workers have no time to read guidelines. So we decided to speak to them by using hospital walls.
I'd say that the reaction was essentially due to the graphic campaign Dr. Pité put in place on the hospital walls. The posters reminded how important washing your hands regularly was, and had punchlines about why it was so important. What was our responsibility? It put the responsibility on the professionals. That's one of the reasons why the campaign wasn't very well received at first. I personally thought the drawings were aggressive. But looking back at them, actually not all that much.
I worked with the cleaning staff. I'd go get the posters. We'd put them up. The walls were maybe oddly painted. And people would say, "What are these odd things that you've put up?" We did change them regularly, but we quickly understood that people felt strongly about it.
You remember how it was?
Oh, this one was good.
Yes, it was the one with the results. When we started to give out the results. That's nice.
In October 2000, Professor Petit and the infectious control team at the University of Geneva Hospitals, HUG, published this article in a prestigious international medical review, The Lancet. It demonstrated the undeniable impact of hand hygiene on hospital infections and the critical role of the replacement of hand washing with soap and water by the use of alcohol-based hand rub. They had obtained irrefutable proof of the dramatic efficacy of their strategy. Healthcare-associated infections have been reduced by 50% at their hospital. The paper very soon became well known throughout the medical professions, and its recommended practices were called the Geneva Model.
You have to understand that you can't impose something like that instantly. It's a scientific process and an academic process. And that's what's interesting too. We change everyday practices, keeping in mind the importance of the medical science already at our disposal. We're developing protocols based on observations that are corroborated by scientific facts.
That's an important point. One of the memorable Geneva studies showed the differences in hygiene practices by nurses, caregivers, and doctors, and showed how efficient the use of sanitizers was. But the turning point was when we proved the direct link between the increase in the frequency of the use of hand sanitizer and the reduction of the number of infections.
I worked in England in a big hospital in Oxford, and we were interested in improving hand hygiene of our healthcare workers. And around that time, this is in the year 2000, Professor Pitet had published his seminal work on his multimodal hand hygiene improvement program from Geneva. And that was one of the most exciting things for me. I discussed with my microbiologist and my chief executive, could we replicate that in a single hospital in the UK? And we did.
It's interesting that in the United States there was always a talk about hand hygiene being important, but nobody had done much to improve hand hygiene compliance for decades. And so Didier's work and others of using alcohol-based hand rubs made it clear that it was much easier to use, much faster. It was actually easier on your hands, caused less irritation of your hands, and was equally, if not more, effective than cleaning with soap and water.
I have to move there, right? I have to move up to there. So I have to understand how it works. But in this case, it doesn't work, right? You have to squeeze the system. Okay. So you do like that, then you take your soap. So let's assume there is soap, right? So this is the soap. So like that. Then you do your hand hygiene, as we know. Then you rinse your hands. Of course, I'm going fast. Then you dry yourself. So you have to touch this. Okay. Then you lose water. Then you have to take these and do these.
What's most impressive to me is this capacity to deliver messages in the community about the prevention of infection. It wasn't always easy. Europeans are not always well liked by their Anglo-Saxon peers. So to me, this was a very important part of it. After that, spreading the concept of hand hygiene as one of the models for infection prevention to the World Health Organization was the next step.
At that time, the World Health Organization, WHO, regarded patient and healthcare workers' safety as a major concern. To accompany its campaign to raise awareness among the broadest range of people about the risk of infection and its prevention, WHO was looking for a symbol. It decided this should be hand hygiene.
The main issue that we looked at in terms of healthcare-associated infection was hand hygiene, but the original scope of the work was very broad. We looked at blood safety, we looked at injection safety, we looked at healthcare waste management, and the vision that we had at the time was that it's such a big problem with so many different causes. We need to focus the world on the most important problem and something that's very actionable. So we came to the idea of hand hygiene.
We wanted to have a flagship element, and that was hand hygiene. We found in some hospitals, even in the best equipped and the highest funded hospitals, that the levels of compliance with hand hygiene was only down at about 20 or 30%. It wasn't a habit. It wasn't a routine. So we had there, I think, a problem that was understandable by everybody, and it had what I think is always a very good ingredient for a campaign. There was a shock element or a shock horror element. People were horrified at the idea that they could be being handled by people whose hands contained the germs of another patient. And that made it an imperative for action, not just an option.
In October, so it's very recent.
The Geneva model was a source of inspiration for the launch of the World Health Organization Clean Care is Safer Care campaign. But the campaign still needed an ambassador.
we had to find somebody to spearhead this clean care is safer care challenge. And Professor Pittier was recommended to me as somebody who would be the right person to do this, and I went and met him, and I was immediately impressed. He is clearly a very humble man, but also somebody whose heart is dedicated to saving lives and making the conditions of healthcare much better and safer than they were at the time. And he's also a very inspirational and energetic man. Early on, I used to go around doing the launches in different regions of the world with him, and we would give presentations. And I got very good at memorizing his opening presentation. He was very flamboyant. He would say, "Welcome to the hospital. The bugs are at the door waiting to say hello to you." So I remember he always started like that in a very dramatic way. And I learned with a French accent to do a similar introduction to my presentation.
And you all need a big round of applause. Because what is important is not what we did together with my team at WHO, but it's really what you did here with the guidelines that we propose to use.
Thus, the World Health Organization and Didier Pittet started a unique collaboration through conferences, meetings, multiple exchanges, and visits to hospitals all around the world. It was an unbelievable challenge to imagine the necessary tools critical for promoting correct actions and best practices.
And implementation tools. Because the tools are what make people apply the guidelines. That's what is unique about the WHO guideline on hand hygiene. It's not the guideline, because the guideline is 900 pages. There are 1,200 references. Who would read that? Nobody, right? So what we did is a summary, and then we did action tools that everybody understands and are using. You know the 5 moments, right? But you don't know what are the papers behind the 5 moments. Who cares about that? Only the experts. You see, that's the difference between guidelines, implementation, and tools for implementation.
The HUG and WHO worked together to conceive universal messages based on scientific evidence. An alcohol-based formulation to rub hands, of course, but also very precise gestures essential to ensuring the strategy's efficacy.
Done.
The gestures to actually clean your hands were born in the microbiological laboratory. There, what you do is you contaminate your hands with bacteria, and you follow a process of gestures, making sure that all surfaces of your hands are covered, and then you test your hands again and look for the remaining bacteria. So then you know if your hands are clean. Once you have approved this technique in the laboratory, you just have to teach it in the clinics.
Das duas mãos.
A teaching process that includes 5 moments where hand hygiene must be performed and complied with in clinical situations to prevent contamination of the healthcare worker, the patient's environment, and also his or her roommate.
The advantage is you clean your hands by rubbing hands, and when the hands are dry, they are clean. So then you can touch the patient, say, "Good morning." You see, thank you. And so then you can take care of the patient. If the patient has a catheter, yeah, it can spread to the patient. So before touching, again, I need to clean hands. Okay? So I will do it again, like that. And once, une deuxième fois, exactly, because I have been touching things, and then I can manipulate the catheter.
recommendations on best practices and an alcohol-based hand rub made available patent-free for all healthcare settings worldwide without any restrictions or discrimination.
Something is made. Everything in Iran has these.
In Geneva, Boston or Sydney, if you want alcohol in the hospital, that's easy. You just buy it. It's not expensive. It's easily available. In low resources countries, that's a totally different story. And if you want healthcare workers to change their behavior, you need to make alcohol-based hand rub available worldwide at affordable cost. And it's not written, so they had to write alcohol on the bottle.
For the WHO formula, many of us contributed to its elaboration using the same principle: alcohol and several different additives, so it would be better tolerated by the hands. Bearing in mind the WHO objectives, we had to be very careful to use products that were available in developing countries. So we had to find simple ingredients that were inexpensive and easily available anywhere. I think that was a very important part of the formulation.
Qui était extrêmement important.
Well, the challenge was actually not only to give the formulation, but also the recipe that goes with the formulation so that hospital pharmacies locally could prepare it at low cost. And it was just very obvious to do it.
More. Up to the second line.
The World Health Organization formula's main advantage is that it's made from ingredients that are cheaper, or at least available on the continent. And you can make the formula without sophisticated equipment. To be honest, it wouldn't have been easy to develop any other hand sanitizer formula without the WHO's formula, which is a potent formula for our developing countries.
Pour nos pays en voie de développement.
Here you are. The sanitizer is properly prepared and labelled. Okay? This is our first bottle. Here we go.
In all of Guinea. Bravo!
Après-demain. Le premier. Applaudissez, c'est votre produit. Le premier flacon.
Since 2015, the WHO has incorporated alcohol-based solutions into its essential medicines list. This list includes those medicines meeting the priority health needs of any population anywhere around the world. Guinea and Liberia are among the latest countries to have benefited from the kit for manufacturing an alcohol-based solution as conceived in Geneva. The kits enable any chemist to use local alcohol to produce their own bottles according to the WHO formulation. Guinea and Liberia are two countries hit hard by the Ebola epidemic, for which local manufacturing and daily use of the alcohol-based hand rub have become a survival issue.
What is important to understand is in fact why the transmission the spreading of the Ebola was so fast. Because the weakness of the health system. You know, the point is also IPC, infection prevention and control, was inexistent. The most important was just to make alcohol-based hand rub solution available. And it was a huge challenge.
Then when you come back, returning the bottle, we have a date of return.
Alcohol-based hand rub is being used in our hospitals now. It is something that we would like to have all over in our health facilities. For it to be sustainable, we prefer if we can produce locally, considering the fact that sugarcane is produced here, and so the raw materials is in country. Sugarcane being a farming product will also provide job opportunity for the locals as well, whilst we use the byproducts to do our hand washing, the hand hygiene stuff.
During the Ebola crisis in West Africa, pharmaceutical companies producing alcohol-based hand rubs pledged to supply institutions confronted with one of the most deadly viruses in the world. Swift action made possible thanks to the POPs, an innovative structure created by the World Health Organization that gathers together the manufacturers of hand rubs willing to promote, on a voluntary basis, the strict recommendations of the Clean Care is Safer Care program. A unique experience for a UN-affiliated organization and an exemplary project free from any commercial considerations that makes sure the same message is delivered by each and every member.
We all have the common goal to increase hand hygiene compliance and to deliver the same message all around the globe to the hospitals and healthcare workers, how they should do hand hygiene, when they should do it, why they should do it, and to have a consistent messaging to promote the WHO toolkit.
It's a kind of, long-term asset investment. And also we should be competitive in providing, affordable product to them, or to provide some educations through the business process. But I think this is a kind of new approach, and I hope this will be a very successful, kind of social, private sector, business.
Millions of bottles of alcohol-based hand rub are used worldwide today. Its effectiveness no longer needs to be proved. However, some studies have pointed out risks linked to its systematic use, such as the possible ecological or sanitary impacts.
The beginning was not that easy. We were criticized and even attacked. The reasons were that some of the products on the market were not effective or not effective enough. They were not meeting the norms. We tested those products in our laboratory and could demonstrate that those products could not be used appropriately in the clinics. So that was not easy. But progressively, products improved all over the place, and most products today available meet the norms for effectiveness. So that's the good part. We always try to answer those critiques by evidence and science.
Yet it is on other, even more sensitive grounds that the WHO teams have had to fight to maintain the widest possible support, regardless of origin, lifestyle, or religion.
We had the fact that when alcohol is used in different countries from around the world or in different patient population, some of the patients actually, and some maybe of the healthcare workers, thought that you could use alcohol for different things and also use this alcohol to drink it. So we have been facing these, and of course you cannot anticipate at the beginning, but we were surprised with that. And well, in the United States, nurses unions who disagree with our guidelines because the application of alcohol-based hand rub could actually damage the nail polish that they were using on their fingers, and also because they were opposed to our regulation not to use false nails during patient care, which to me was really surprising. But finally, with time, we went on, and now it's okay. To me, what has been the most important experience has been with the Muslim healthcare workers. The beginning of the story was that I heard from the National Patient Safety Agency in the UK that a nurse, a Muslim nurse working in a hospital in the UK, applying alcohol-based hand rub every day on her hands, was actually evicted from home by her father. So at that time, the National Patient Safety Agency asked us, what do we do? So what we had to do is actually contact the Muslim clergy in Saudi Arabia, read the Quran with Muslim scholars and people from the Muslim clergy, and look at every sentence that was dealing with alcohol so that we could perfectly understand what was the issue.
In the Middle East, religious authorities have agreed on the matter. In Saudi Arabia, the most prestigious religious leaders have issued a fatwa to prevent what happened in the UK from being repeated elsewhere.
Having that religious fatwa or guidance has helped in moving this program in the region very quickly, because if that question is raised by anybody across the spectrum of healthcare workers or patients, then immediately we come up with the answer that this has been addressed by the religious leaders in the country, and they have given their clearance to use it.
It was very important that we got the religious leadership to give us a very clear directive that using such a product in the alcohol hand rub is not in contradiction with the Islamic tradition and culture.
Who doesn't have? We all have? Okay. Are you all ready? Okay, let us start. You look at me, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your hands are clean now.
Oh, that's just amazing. It's just unbelievable. That's the first time I see it in a place like this. Doctors, nurses, they are all playing the game. They are all smiling. They are happy. This is really, really a great success. I'm so moved by this. It's just an emotion.
The Arabian Peninsula has been fighting the coronavirus since 2012. The virus seems to originate from animals. The bat in Asia and the Middle Eastern camel are suspected as possible sources. It causes a respiratory syndrome transmittable to humans when close contact occurs. The situation has led Saudi Arabian sanitary authorities to impose alcohol-based hand rubs in the most sacred Muslim site, Mecca, where pilgrims gather by the thousands.
I was the Deputy Minister of Health for 5 years, the Ministry of Health, which is in charge of public health issues related to the Hajj and pilgrimage. So during that time, we have actually, and now continuing, encouraged the pilgrims to use alcohol hand rub when they come in. Actually, some of the voluntary donations that are given to the pilgrims when they come is small bags that contains alcohol hand rub, plus an umbrella to avoid heat stroke during the hot weather, and also things that will be used by the pilgrims while they're doing the ritual of the Hajj.
Barriers are coming down. Even the idea of infection control is progressing. The WHO program is expanding and becoming the norm, a response for controlling and combating today's and tomorrow's epidemics, such as seasonal flu, which every year makes its long and deadly voyage from the southern hemisphere to spread around the world. And we know how tragic it can turn out to be, as in 1918, when the Spanish flu killed over 30 million people. Such an epidemic would not be so devastating today, although treatment centers would still be sources of infection.
It's still a reality, even if the reality has evolved in the last few years, because the fight against these types of infection has progressed. The patient is still scared. And I must admit that even if the risk is lower today, he's right to be scared.
If the number of healthcare-associated infections is decreasing in developed countries, it remains devastating elsewhere. The Geneva model has become a standard for healthcare, almost a brand. Every other year, infection control experts gather in Geneva to attend an international conference followed by several million people on social media. A way to exchange, collect information, be inspired and challenged by actions taken elsewhere. In 2009, even a hand hygiene dance was created. It's been seen all around the world. It has been adapted in hundreds of countries across different cultures. a wave of creativity that is mobilizing healthcare workers worldwide. One after another, public institutions as well as private ones are joining this process of raising awareness. Some of them are even rewarded for their remarkable efforts.
At each of our audit visits, we only spend half a day at the institution. And as a guide to kind of look around what is happening in their program, we use the WHO self-assessment framework. So they have very detailed questions in each element of the 5 strategies in the multimodal kind of program. And so that's a really good guide in terms of assessing, do they really have these things in sometimes, part of the time, or none at all?
8. 1 to 8, yes.
Okay. Are they medical students?
Yeah, medical students.
Oh, come back. Don't be shy, don't be shy.
We want to talk to you.
We want to talk to you. Hi, I'm Professor Peter, Professor of Medicine. Hi.
Hi. Good morning.
Hello. Morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Dr. Ling.
Tell us, we have a question to you. Do you know the 5 moments?
For hand hygiene, 5 moments.
5 moments.
5 moments.
On trouve de moins en moins
There are fewer and fewer professionals who say, oh, hand sanitizers are not for me. I don't like them. When I meet a group or do a staff meeting and no one around the table has any objections and people naturally say, I mostly use the alcohol-based solution. I still wash my hands now and then, but I mostly use hand sanitizers. I realize we're slowly getting there. But we can monitor this progress by watching the stocks disappear. We've been struggling for many years now, training people, raising awareness, and it's finally paid off. Not everywhere, obviously. We'd like for everybody to be part of the change, but there's still room for improvement. Otherwise, we'd get bored in the next few years.
At present, 150 countries have signed the WHO pledge, making the commitment to promote best practices on a daily basis. It also obliges them to acknowledge the existence of infections within their own healthcare system. Yet to involve states, their leaders and the ministers concerned, visibility is crucial, keeping the issue on stage, front and centre. Alain Serretti created the Lien Association at the beginning of the 1990s, an organisation to protect patients infected after receiving care. The first of its kind in France. Since then, he has continued the fight with his wife, herself a victim, so that patients will never be forgotten.
In healthcare, as in other matters actually, as long as the topic stays within the realm of technicalities and is being dealt with by technicians, no politician will ever have any interest in the subject. As soon as the subject becomes a public debate, in the press for instance, as soon as it becomes a popular thing and a wide range of people understand the problem, people begin to grasp how much it's important to them. And that's when they start asking politicians for accountability. What are you actually doing for us?
This is actually a very interesting and very important part of the job. Health diplomacy. In this campaign, we had to sign a pledge together with the health minister of a country for the strategy. So you have the opportunity to meet with these health ministers and different political leaders. Sometimes it's in the ante-room before the ceremony, if you like. You have 10 minutes, you have 20 minutes, sometimes you have 3 minutes, and you have to pitch for the strategy. And you know, these people are extremely busy. They have a huge agenda, they have tons of priorities, and you need to make sure when you pitch that you go for these strategies, working with them. So it's a unique privilege. You are here around the table with the health minister. The minister is a man, she's a woman, you're a man. We are talking about human exchanges, and you could create and share the most beautiful project for their country. You do a palmful. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Like the tongue, around the tongue. Yes.
Yes.
We know that you can go to little tiny places in Africa and see the posters, the 5 moments for hand hygiene posters. And I still feel so proud. I'm not sure I realised just what an impact it could have, but I certainly knew it was going to be huge. And the reason for that is when you have good leaders, when you have leaders that actually are going to commit to making a change and saving lives, it will happen.
He is unique, and what I like about Didier, and I think this is illustrated in everything that's happened, is he refuses to take the word no as an answer. If he asks a question, he wants to make it happen.
He's a man who is infectious, if you want to put it in a word, regarding healthcare. But infectious in the way that he draws people in, he gives you the inspiration to do the work, to be good at what you do, but to show others how it should be done.
When I say I'm on Didier Pittet's staff, people usually say, "Oh yes, the hand hygiene guy."
He started with a very simple idea, a very inexpensive idea. He didn't come around with revolutionary ideas that would require new technologies and would require the whole system to change to be able to put them in place. And his persuasiveness was very strong, and that made him the best ambassador for his own idea.
I believe he's done an amazing job, beyond anything I could imagine in the field he was in. So my only role in this situation is to get rid of detractors and obstacles he might face, and say, let people do their work, especially when they do such good work.
In the last 20 years, Didier Pittet has travelled to many hospitals around the world, from the most prestigious to the most precarious. With the same stamina and the same strength, he has always remained himself.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Honours and distinctions have come his way. The most outstanding is the medal he received as an honorary Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE, awarded by Queen Elizabeth II, which he proudly wears on the most formal occasions.
This event is generally a white tie event, and I wear a bow tie. So it's the opportunity to wear this medal. I respect this tradition, this incredible honor I was made. I don't see any reason not to respect it. It's the best way I can repay the honor that was bestowed upon me.
Prizes, medical awards and recognition imply media coverage. They play a necessary role and are undoubtedly a way to place the spotlight on the patients and the healthcare workers, a way to give millions of anonymous victims an identity, a human face.
No. Hand hygiene? He didn't get it from me. I can say that much. I'm quite sure of it. Unless he says otherwise.